Hey, what is up everybody? Mobalytics jungle expert Ryan Flares Doyle here, and today we're going to be tackling our low elo tier list for patch 10.17. But honestly, we all know this is a patch 10.16b patch, so before we head straight into the tier list, let's cover what all changed. Caitlyn is going to lose 5 base move speed this patch, where Sona is going to have her AP ratios tweaked from dealing 50 to 40% AP, and her E movement speed to yourself and allies is downgraded from 3 to 2%. Lux is getting a bug fix to her W, as well as a direct nerf to her baseline shield strength, losing 25 shield power at rank 5, as well as her mana cost being increased per rank, but receiving an additional 5% AP ratio as compensation. Evelynn is being toned down and having her Q nerfed by 5 damage per spike, where Hecarim has his E movement speed halted at the max timing of 3 seconds from 100% move speed to 85%. Qiyana's on-hit damage ratio with her W is getting changed from 20 to 10%, with the E base damage being nicked by 20 at rank 5. Yone's base damage at rank 5 Q is weakened by 20 damage while losing the ability to lifesteal from his ultimate. Aatrox is gaining 10% more bonus AD from his ultimate in the late game, whereas Varus has his attack speed increased by 0.75 per level. While Kai'Sa is going to go ahead and get an AD growth increase of 0.6 per level, Kai'Sa gets a huge Worlds buff to her AD per level going on from 1.7 to 2, as well as her E attack speed steroid being increased from 40 to 60 to 40 to 80%. And lastly, Gragas gets an additional 3 armor slapped onto him for good measure. Now, without any further delay, let's get right into it. Starting us off in the top lane, our starting S tier roster is Urgot, Jax, Renekton, Mordekaiser, and Fiora, with the Rowdy Rough Boys remaining in God tier, that being Garen, Darius, and Shen. As for the changes to the list, we have Nasus falling from S to A tier, as the current S tier champs just don't give him any breathing room to scale, as games are ending before he can even become relevant. Akali moves from the graveyard to B tier, as her matchups top are improving thanks to the damage swap on her Shuriken. Riven rises from B to A tier, as her favorable matchups are becoming more and more popular, alongside her as a great counter to the meta that scales well in lower brackets. Renekton rampages from A to S tier, as he is just too dominant of a lane bully to ignore, currently just winning lane and winning games. And finally, Aatrox moves up to A tier from B tier thanks to the nature of low elo solo queue games running later and the late game scaling buffs he got this patch. So starting us off in our first top lane spotlight, we got Riven, who moved from B to A tier this patch. Riven is a notorious low elo stomper who is gaining more popularity in low elo and high elo. In gold plus elo, she does better versus Yone, Irelia, Gangplank, Sylas, and Vladimir, but still struggles a bit against the current S tier roster. And this is all thanks to the previous buffs to her scaling on patch 10.14, and a nice bug fix on her Q passive on patch 10.15, and her more favorable matchups getting more and more popular due to them getting buffed. But you also have games going much longer, providing much needed scaling time for Riven to pick up her items and scale. She'll tear apart bruisers and always remain a threat to the popular mage and assassin mid laners and squishy bot laners currently. For your build, be sure to buy your cleaver into Death's Dance while opting to take your scaling CDR room to reach your 40% CDR. And as always, Riven is mechanically challenging, so you'll likely drop a few hundred LP learning her. However, she does get even better the higher up you climb, so go for it. Speaking of scaling, Aatrox got a nice little scaling buff, propelling him into the A tier from B tier this patch. Aatrox has been struggling for a while when it comes to solo queue, but this little touch up is nudging him back into a decent spot. Aatrox still has a decent time having the opportunity to snowball and really run down your lane opponent, meaning you'll scale even harder when ahead and hard carrying more games. Just like Riven, you want to at least rush your Black Cleaver and Death's Dance to get those juicy stats while either building defensive or more hard carry if you're snowballing. Your powerful lifesteal and ult speed reset mechanics will allow you to really bulldoze your way through mostly AD heavy meta at the moment and force teams to pay the Grievous Wounds tax, dampening their power spikes. Last up, we got Renekton, who rises to S tier this patch from A tier. Renekton is really a hit-or-miss champion, especially in low elo. He's not particular about wanting games to go later on, but most of the time low elo players can steamroll their way through most lane matchups and feel really oppressive. He's mostly to what I consider a mental breaker champion who stomps over your body in a win lane win game style that makes players give up and troll. I know, totally weird, Renekton has mind-controlling powers, but seriously, Renekton can seriously win you some more games on account of how snowbally he can be in the early and mid-game and feel unkillable over dragon fights. Just, leave top once every 5 minutes or so and secure those dragons, cause those are your win con right now. And again, rush your Blade of the Ruined King into Black Cleaver as you'll stay on top of your targets more easily. Moving on over to my home sweet home in the jungle, our starting S tier roster is Warwick, Vi, Hecarim, Graves, Kayn, Echo, and Kha'Zix, with no god tier this patch as well. However, I got it wrong on the last go round, as Hecarim was definitely a god tier on 10.16, but fell due to the nerf on his E this patch. As for the changes to the list, we have Lilia joining us from the graveyard to B tier because you all just begged for a 46% win rate jungler to be added to the list, so here you go. Evelynn drops from A to B tier because the 5 damage nerf on her Q is going to hurt her power farming, especially early, and really does add up in fights, not allowing you to get them as low and in range to ultimate. With Ivern, I'm pulling a Sylvanas and burning him straight to the ground like Teldrassil, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. TLDR, Ivern is good, but not good enough for people to play him to keep him on the list. And before I move on to the jungle highlights, no, we are not putting Gragas on the list. He currently is sitting at a 45%-ish win rate and historically stays near there in low elo. You all used your power to get Lily on board, and you only get one. So first up for the jungle highlight, we got Lilia. I know, ironic. I seriously love this champion. She's fun, rewarding, and has a low entry skill ceiling, but high mastery curve to learn. That being said, she does have a 46% win rate currently and really shouldn't make this list. What's keeping her from reaching 50% win rate mark is due to her unique playstyle of bobbing and weaving into fights and managing your speeding stacks. You need to successfully time and weave in your abilities, or you'll end up dropping all of your stacks and be a deer stuck in the headlights. You also just can't waltz right up to the enemy team unless you're already giga-fed. You'll be instantly targeted and locked down. With the current support meta shifting to enchanters, you now lose an engager for your team, which means your only real way to start fights is firing your swirling seed, bowling, hoping to hit anybody in general, let alone priority targets, so you can put them to sleep and one-shot them with your WQ combo. For her build, it's just better that you rush your Runic Echoes into Liandry's while picking up defensive items like Deadman's Plate in the mid-game while finishing off defensive AP items like Zanya's or situational items like Rylai's or Morello. Lilia's got a ton of mixed reviews. I personally think she's on the ship of being incredibly strong at the moment, but she is lacking in closing out games compared to other easier and safer junglers at the moment like Hecarim or Graves. Next up, we got Master Easy, who's chilling in our A tier. He has got a lot of you all scratching your heads as to why he's not S tier, but the reason being is that we all want you to climb out of low elo, whereas the higher elo you are, the less likely you can pull off Noob Stomp on Yi. However, if you happen to be iron to the gold range, he would be considered S tier. Most players in those brackets aren't confident in skirmishes and teamfights, generally focusing on the wrong target or just not using crowd control at the right time, which is why Yi just gets so fed thanks to his movement speed and attack speed, leaving him plenty of room to snowball off player mistakes. He also tends to struggle as well versus Rammus, who has been picking up in heat and low elo for a while now. So while on the topic of Rammus, last up we got Rammus, who's honing in on S tier but is just okay with being A tier. Rammus is pretty much the new low elo counter pick, just like how Trundle was patches ago. Rammus has been powerballing his way up in win rate over the last 2 patches, and it's mainly due to the fact that the meta is shifting to mostly AD comps, especially mid and top. Rammus is great if you're auto-filled so long as you actually clear the jungle and not gank 24/7, but of course even better when you know what you're doing. Lots of players wander aimlessly, allowing Rammus to take advantage of enemies' mispositioning and locking them down for a pick for your team, all while he is unkillable himself thanks to all that armor. Starting us off in the mid lane, our S tier roster is Fizz, Yasuo, Katarina, and Galio, with Zed being the king of mid lane and God tier. As for the changes to the list, we don't really have many, but Fizz is dropping from God to S tier as more of his unfavorable matchups are coming back into the meta, stopping him from grabbing picks and snowballing. Same as Fizz, both Echo and Diana drop from S to A tier for similar meta shifts, cancelling their ability to hard carry games. So first up, we got a Yone Spotlight, who did receive a direct nerf this patch, but sits in our B tier. Now, we stuck him there last patch, but he was more so leaning to joining A tier later in the patch, but now is solidified where he's at now. Yone is a bit easier to pick up than his brother, with a lot of his core mechanics being really clunky or one-dimensional, meaning once players get used to him, you know exactly what to expect every time. He is still going to be dealing tons of damage and snowball hard when he grabs a lead. And his Spirit Form plus ult combo makes his all-ins feel really safe from a distance and can be used to grab leads in the mid lane, but if used improperly, just sets himself up to die pretty easily and fall into irrelevancy. For the build that is working the best on him at the moment, it seems to be settling on Berserker's Greaves Rush into a Static Shiv and IE. Next up, we got Akali, who last patch I claimed to be a bad, worthless champion, but now after the buffs have settled, she's back to being a slightly above average champion when you account for her severe level skill required to play her effectively. Like I've mentioned previously, by adding the Q buffs, this helped certain wave clear Thresh points and gave her more opportunities to roam and impact the map. But now, with the Shuriken being swapped from physical to magic damage, now if it lands on a target, there's a good possibility that you have to follow up and they're going to die really quickly. In Gold Elo, her best matchups currently are into Irelia, LeBlanc, Sylas, Echo, Zoe, Azir, and Syndra, while she struggles against Swain, Galio, Neeko, and Ahri. If your goal is to climb quickly before the end of the season, do not pick up Akali if you haven't already picked her up already. Otherwise, if you've been putting the work in, this is still a viable choice to climb, especially since the higher elo you get, the better she is. Last up, we got Ahri, who almost makes it to S tier this patch, but remains in our A tier. Ahri has been killing it this patch, going toe-to-toe with nearly everybody in the mid lane, but struggles to consistently win due to her low damage output. You pretty much have to land your charms to guarantee a kill or burst down a target, then have to play in position perfectly to deal the rest of your damage. Kinda like if Elise had to play without ever having to use her cocoon. Electrocute Ahri is performing much better than her Glacial setup currently, with Luden's Echo and Morellonomicon being her staple pickups. Ahri is a really safe pick into the mostly AD melee heavy meta and is solid pickup if you're looking for some quick LP gains. In the bottom lane, our starting S tier roster will be Ashe, Jhin, Ezreal, and Caitlyn, with no God tier this patch. As for the changes to the list, we have Varus rejoining us from the Shadow Realm to B tier thanks to the direct buffs to his on-hit build, Senna jumping up from A from B tier as her ADC style of gameplay is now outperforming her fasting style of play. Jinx is going to drop from S to A tier as she is just needing too much gold currently to feel mediocre at best compared to other AD carries electing Mana Moon and spiking much harder than her, or just doesn't compare to other crit rush AD carries. And lastly, Caitlyn drops from God tier to S tier as Riot finally reverted one of the guaranteed 1% buffs she got a couple of patches ago, that being her movement speed. So she'll fall in line with other AD carries and stay strong at the moment. First up on the ADC spotlight, we got Jhin. Jhin was already keeping up with Caitlyn pretty decently, just a few footsteps behind her, and now with Riot putting a limp in Caitlyn's step this patch, Jhin has a fair chance of pushing into God tier. Jhin is an excellent utility AD carry if you're tired of just playing Ashe. After mastering your reload and wave clear patterns, all that's really left for you to understand is your positioning in teamfights and fighting picks, landing your shots American hero Chris Kyle style with your ultimate. Jhin is going to have a wonderful time layering on CC targets and bursting out enemies with his 4th shot, so get out there with Jhin and keep it taco. Next up, we got Senna, who rises from our B to A tier. Senna has finished her diet and is hungry to consume souls once again. With less favorable supports being nerfed to pair with fasting Senna, AD carry Senna has become more popular, especially with the tier build. Right now, it's just better to play into Senna's scaling, stacking your tiers, and collecting your souls to carry late game team fights. And since you automatically scale well to your souls, you can't afford to buy cheaper items such as your lethality items instead of crit items. Her best matchups currently are into Aphelios, Xayah, Kai'Sa, Kalista Ezreal, and Miss Fortune, and should really look out for the Kog'Maw matchup. Lastly, we got Kai'Sa, who is staying put in A tier. Kai'Sa is rocking with a nifty late game scaling buff, with the baseline AD growth being increased and her E attack speed steroid being beefed up. This means Kai'Sa is primed and ready to be a huge aggressive hyper carry this patch and likely into Worlds. Her best build is to take Halo Blades so you can get that burst from your 5-hit passive more easily, while the AP route on Kai'Sa is much better currently after you've built your Mana Moon and Rage Blade. Kai'Sa was struggling against a lot of AD carries, but with most of them getting nerfed, this buff should propel her forward to her former glory, and Fi can actually climb in rank now. Just kidding, Josh, don't fire me. Last but certainly not least, our starting S tier roster in the bot lane will be Blitzcrank, Soraka, Leona, Morgana, Senna, and Thresh, with our God tier being just Lulu this patch. As for the changes to the list, we have Blitzcrank falling from God to S tier as he just isn't smacking supports around as hard in lower brackets currently. While both Sona and Lux fall down a tier as they both receive direct nerfs to stop them from duo bot laning together, hurting both their individual power as well. So first up in our support champion spotlight, we got Budget Lux, who moved down from S to A tier. Yes, I know I'm highlighting a champion that just got directly nerfed, but she still has some redeeming qualities. She had an absurd win rate last patch thanks to a bug with her shield actually tripling the amount instead of double. Kinda makes sense why she drops down when you add the fact that its numbers got weakened too. However, Budget Morgana provides great lockdown and burst potential as landing your snares is about the same effect as a Morgana binding. You dish out your damage and your bot lane or whoever follows up and gets you that much needed pick. Your E also slows much more or zones targets well since it's a fairly big ability which will help deter ganks better for your team. Next up, we got Lulu, who remains in our god tier. Lulu's got it all. She's got the shields, the peels, the attack speed steroid or polymorph, and an ult that provides HP and CC. She's currently one of the most picked supports in the game and is pretty much due to the fact that she's legit the enchanter version of Nautilus. Her kit is just loaded with everything you need to allow your team to succeed. Her hardest losing matchup was to Sona, but Sona just got a direct nerf this patch, leaving her with barely anybody to contest her other than Soraka, who just barely edged out against her. In teamfights, be sure to buff up your carries and stay behind your carries. You should not be trying to do anything flashy with her, just sit back, buff your carries, poly the enemy divers, and just let your team do the work. For rune choice, Guardian statistically does much better than Aerie by just a little bit, but on average more players tend to keep Aerie for a bit stronger laning phase. Last up, we got Soraka-chan, who's enjoying her time in the S tier. Soraka is a nightmare fuel in this meta. She's just severely underplayed, but will single-handedly carry games in this meta where she can be a huge heal bot for her team. Again, by picking Soraka, you're forcing players to pay the Grievous Wounds tax, taking away from their item spikes, and most of the time, because of your build, it won't even matter. Also, you can follow up so well with your team on picks by placing your silence on top of them, or even just disrupting all-in attempts with it. Be sure to rush your Athene's Unholy Grail since it pairs well when you go poke with your Qs, followed up by Ardent Censer for a huge spike in your team's mid and late game damage, then make things even more unfair with a semi-global AoE heal with Redemption. And that's all I got for you today, ladies and gents. Thank you all so much for watching our Mobalytics patch 10.17 tier list, and as always, be sure to subscribe to the Mobalytics YouTube channel so you can be updated for more of our content in the future, and check out mobalytics.gg for our goodies that we offer over there. Trust me, you will not want to miss out. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe out there. Remember that you matter, and good luck out on the Rift Summoner.